Let's now turn our attention to why this matters when we consider the potential effects on audiences. In media effects research, our overarching concern is generally this: what sorts of outcomes might we expect from the many ways that we, diverse mass audience members, are influenced by and learn from media? Additionally, how do media impact our real-world interactions with others? News media are particularly important because audiences tend to take news as factual because it reflects what's going on in society around us. Topics like crime, politics, and other local or national level events are useful for mass audiences to know about. I'll overview some of the major theories that guide the study of media effects and provide some examples to illustrate these ideas in the context of fake news. Let's start with agenda setting. The news media serve a crucial role in a democracy, which is the duty and goal to keep the public informed. News media occupy an agenda-setting role because they influence the salience of topics on the public agenda. So a famous quote that refers to the agenda-setting function is this: "The news media do not tell us what to think, but they are successful in telling us what to think about." For example, when we hear about violent crime, natural disasters, rigged elections, and fake news, we give these topics our time, attention, and thoughts. Let's turn our attention to news framing. News frames function to suggest how audiences can interpret an issue or event. Language, images, and accurate depictions of reality matter. For example, news organizations regularly report on external threats, such as terrorism and immigration. Communication scholars Dixon and Williams conducted a content analysis of news media in 2014 and found that Latinos are severely overrepresented in news media as undocumented immigrants, and Muslims are overrepresented as terrorists. In other words, in their extensive review of cable and network news, they found that Latino perpetrators were significantly more likely to be seen as immigrants at 97% rate in the news than to actually be immigrants in American society at 47%, according to official reports. Furthermore, 99% of undocumented immigrant perpetrators of crime are Latino, according to news media depictions and reports, while 75% of undocumented immigrants in society can be characterized as Latino, according to official reports. In the case of Muslims making headlines and news framing, Muslim perpetrators were much more likely to be portrayed as terrorists at an 81% rate than to actually be terrorists in American society at 6%, according to official reports. A startling finding shows that non-Muslims were underrepresented as terrorists on network and cable news at 19% depiction rate, compared to how often they appear as terrorists in society at 94%, according to official reports. Terror acts are committed mostly by white American men, yet terrorism is framed as a uniquely Muslim problem, an external threat.
And this is Terror Taxi.
Terrorists! Who do you think? The Libyans!
Framing effects are most often studied in the long term, concerned with how the impact of exposure to certain messages influences our enduring beliefs and opinions on the issues. Cultivation theory is concerned with effects stemming from what people absorb from their exposure to media messages over long periods of time. Those who spend more time watching television are more likely to perceive the real world in ways that reflect the most common and recurrent messages of the TV world in comparison to those who watch less TV but are otherwise comparable in terms of important demographic characteristics. For example, despite the fact that violent crime has been on a downslope in terms of frequency for a couple of decades now, at least since the 1990s into the early 2000s, heavy TV news consumers show adherence to what cultivation theorist George Gerbner called the mean world syndrome, which is the tendency to believe that the world is a mean and scary place. This mean world cultivation is based in part on the prevalence of the "if it bleeds, it leads" crime news reports in prime time. Media priming theory describes the short-term impact from media exposure on our subsequent judgments or behaviors. For example, media coverage of political events can prime the information people use when judging the president's performance. Recall the images circulating on news reports and then social media showing Trump's dismal inauguration crowd. There were some creative social media users who juxtaposed Trump's inauguration crowd photo with Obama's inauguration photo, which showed the National Mall packed with attendees. This is a good example of a media prime that can lead to an association in media audiences' minds of crowd size as an indicator of a president's popularity and therefore approval rating by the public. Extensive media priming research shows that media coverage of political events can prime the information people use when making judgments about presidential performance. Another example of media priming could be President Trump's labeling CNN fake news.
No, I'm not going to give you a question. I'm not going to give you a question.
Can you state categorically?
You are fake news.
Sir,
go ahead.
You can see how this can prime audiences to believe that CNN is fake news, so when they see news by CNN, which is a reputable news organization, regardless of whether the president likes the news CNN reports, they deem it fake. This may impact the public's perception of CNN as a whole. They could immediately distrust CNN because Trump says CNN is fake news. News media priming has lasting potential in the short term, despite the truthfulness of it. Now let's examine the other side of this and talk about beliefs about media effects. Uses and gratifications theory states that we as media audiences actively seek out various types of media content based on different motivations and levels of attentiveness. For instance, perhaps sometimes we engage in confirmation bias. Most people know that CNN is said to have a liberal lean and Fox News is said to have a conservative lean. So depending on your political leaning, you may prefer to hear your news from a particular news outlet. The politicized ways in which these various news media describe or frame the news confirm the political biases that we have, and that just reinforces our already existing perspectives on the issues. For example, we could argue that one reason Cameron Harris effectively capitalized off of his fake news story about Clinton rigging the election was that he knew he was appealing to people who already strongly believed that the system was faulty, that establishment politicians are all corrupt, and that Trump was being treated unfairly as a result. Therefore, Harris's story resonated well with this line of thought many already held, so these audiences were quick to believe the story, even though it was later determined to be a completely fabricated fake news story. This leads us to our final points about news media effects. Life in our media-saturated digital age has resulted in social media platforms' ability to learn many things about us, including what we like and what our perspectives are about various issues. The notion that likes become locks gains importance. When we like something on Facebook or subscribe to following a certain public figure or group or page, we're communicating meaningfully about who we are and what we care about. These bits of information are powerful in that they reinforce our existence in the echo chambers or sameness silos of like-minded people. If I, for example, repeatedly like certain types of posts, then the social media algorithms suggest that I follow or friend others who have similar activity patterns. A danger of falling comfortably into our social media echo chambers of sameness is that we recycle the views we already hold among people who already think like we do. In other words, we must actively seek out a variety of news sources to gain a full picture of news media topics and how they're being discussed in various circles. Recent research by communications scholar Song, published in 2017, looked at what motivates us to seek out different news media. The findings show that anger, a strong and unpleasant emotion, causes us to want to seek out our echo chambers and, conversely, not expose ourselves to competing perspectives. Confirmation bias makes us comfortable. The same study found that among conservatives and liberals, trends show that liberals tend to seek out news media from many different outlets. So they're breaking out of their echo chambers at times to hear issues talked about from different political views. Whereas conservative news consumers were less likely to do so, instead preferring to stay entrenched in the company of like minds. Lastly, a related topic we'll hear about later is media misinformation. What happens when news media get things wrong? Well, credible news organizations strive for accuracy, but studies show that despite the best intentions and efforts to issue a correction to an incident of media misinformation, audiences tend to remember and believe the first thing they heard. Of course, there are many components involved in misinformation disseminated through mass media, but it's generally very difficult to correct misinformation once it occurs, and essentially to change people's minds to believe the truth. Timing, placement, repetition, and reach assume particular importance in efforts to correct media misinformation. You can see the powerful connection here in terms of labeling all news media fake news, because when fake news passes as real news, and when real news is deemed untrustworthy, we create the perfect storm towards a very dangerous situation in society that, as noted before, threatens the place and respectability of the free press in sustaining a healthy democracy.